Hey guys, thanks for being here on our new channel. Most of you are from our main channel, but some of you are new here. This is where we will be uploading our long stories. Be sure to smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. You guys are absolute legends. It started with a song. I remember it so clearly. One morning, after breaking up with Violet, I opened my front door and found a small antique music box sitting on the doormat. It wasn't wrapped or anything, just sitting there like it was waiting for me. No note, no card, just the box. The craftsmanship was weirdly old-fashioned, the kind you'd expect to see in a dusty store in some rundown part of town. You know the type. The kind you'd never think to buy but feel kind of weirdly fascinated by. Anyway, I didn't know why I picked it up. Maybe I thought it was just some random gift someone had left for me, or maybe I was still in a haze from the breakup. I hadn't heard from Violet in days. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and the split had been messy. I'm not proud of how it went down, but it was necessary, right? She had her issues, I had mine, and things just didn't work anymore. I figured some space was what we both needed. I didn't know that breaking up would be the last peaceful thing that would happen in my life. The music box was small, probably about the size of a hand. I opened it, and at first, all I heard was the soft, familiar chime of a lullaby. That's when I noticed it. The song. It wasn't just any lullaby. It was something familiar, something haunting. It was our song. The one we used to play when we hang out together in my old room late at night, the lights off, just talking about everything and nothing. But there was something off about the tune now. The melody was distorted, like it was being played underwater, warped in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was just a weird coincidence. I set it down and went on with my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days, more gifts started showing up. At first, they were small things. An old postcard, a weird trinket, a piece of jewelry I didn't recognize. All of them felt too personal, like Violet had somehow gotten into my life again. But I kept ignoring it. I kept telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, or maybe I was just losing my mind after the breakup. But then things got worse. It was around the fourth or fifth gift, a twisted-looking necklace, when I started hearing things. Small whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe the pipes in my apartment. But one night, I woke up to find a music box playing again. This time, it wasn't just a lullaby. There were words, faint at first, almost like murmurs. When I leaned in closer, I could make out what it was saying. I know what you did. You can't hide from me. It was like a cold weight in my chest. I swear I could feel the room close in on me. I jumped out of bed and slammed the box shut, but the whispers didn't stop. They kept echoing in my head even after I buried it deep in the back of my closet. Even when I locked the door and tried to sleep, they were there. My secrets, things I'd told no one, things that I'd buried so deep that I forgot they even existed, started to come back to me piece by piece. The more I tried to forget them, the more they seemed to surface, like Violet was pulling them out of my head one after another. I couldn't focus anymore. Work was a mess. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. And the worst part, the feeling of being watched. I started noticing shadows in the corners of my apartment, shapes that weren't there before, standing still and unmoving. It was always in the periphery of my vision, and every time I looked directly at them, they'd vanish. But I knew something was there. I couldn't explain it. And then one night I came home to find Violet standing in my living room. I had locked the door. I knew I had. But there she was, standing in the middle of the room, her eyes fixed on me, unblinking. I didn't hear her come in. I didn't hear the door open. It was like she just appeared. I froze. I didn't even know what to say, what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest, and for a moment I was convinced I was hallucinating. But she wasn't a ghost. She was solid, flesh and blood. There was a stillness to her, though, something empty and cold. She was dressed in the same old jacket she used to wear when we were together. The one I had told her to keep, even though it wasn't really my style. She just stood there, staring at me like she was waiting for something. I backed up slowly, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to say, how to react. My mind was running 1,000 miles a minute, trying to piece together how she got in, how this was even happening. And that's when she spoke. Not out loud, but inside my head. You can't escape me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen to the floor. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a sick, twisted thing that didn't belong on her face. It was like a mask, something that didn't fit. And then, without warning, she vanished. I don't even know how I got to sleep that night, but when I woke up the next morning, I felt that I hadn't slept at all. The music box was on my bed. I didn't remember bringing it there, but somehow I knew it was hers, a gift from her, just like the others. And I knew deep down that this wasn't just some sick joke or coincidence. It was her. She was doing this. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to shut her out, she would always find a way to reach me. Days passed. The gifts kept coming. The whispers got louder. Violet wasn't just appearing in the shadows anymore. She was in the room with me, just out of sight, watching, waiting. It wasn't just psychological anymore. It was like I was being hunted. And then the realization hit me. Violet had done something to bind herself to me. It was like she had used me, used my weaknesses, and turned them into something I couldn't escape. I tried to go to the police once. I even told them everything. The music box, the gifts, the whispers, Violet's strange appearances. They just thought I was losing it. They didn't believe me. And then I realized there was only one way out, only one way to stop her. But I was too afraid to do it. And that's how I ended up stuck in this nightmare. Every night the shadows grow thicker. Every morning I find another gift waiting for me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I'm not sure if she's haunting me or if I'm just losing my mind entirely. Either way, I can't escape her. I can't escape what she's done to me. And I think I'm starting to understand. Death. Death is my only way out. I thought I was finally free. That's what I kept telling myself. I moved to a new city, found a new job, even rented a new apartment. Anything to escape Olivia. She was my obsessive ex, and for months I've been dealing with her constant messages, surprise visits, and weird, unsettling behavior. I had to get out. I couldn't keep living in that constant state of anxiety, always looking over my shoulder, wondering when she would pop up next. So I moved, packed up everything, left behind my old life, and started fresh. A new place, new people, and for a while it worked. I was living my life again, not feeling like I had to be on alert all the time. I told myself I was safe now, but of course I was wrong. I first saw her on my third day in the new city. It was just after I had moved in, so I was out picking up groceries trying to get settled in. I had just stepped out of the corner store when I looked across the street, and there she was, Olivia, standing on the sidewalk right across from me. I froze. My heart stopped. I swear I felt the blood drain from my face. She was just standing there staring at me, wearing that same creepy, smug smile that she always wore when she was in control. The kind that made you feel like you were the only one in the world who didn't know what she was capable of. She didn't move, didn't speak, just smiled. My first instinct was to run, but I couldn't. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, locked in this weird standoff across the street. When I finally snapped out of it, I turned and bolted back to my apartment as fast as I could. My chest was tight, and my hands were shaking. I didn't know how she found me, but I didn't have time to think about that now. I just needed to get home, lock the door, and breathe. It didn't make sense. I had blocked her on everything. Phone, social media, email. There was no way she should have known where I was. But there she was, like she'd been waiting for me. I don't know why, but I started to feel like maybe I'd never escape her. That night, when I went to bed, I left the light on in the hallway. I was already starting to feel paranoid. Was she out there? Was she watching me again? My thoughts were racing, and sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I checked my phone. Nothing. No calls, no messages. I figured maybe it was just a coincidence, a weird moment of deja vu. But deep down, I knew I wasn't so lucky. The messages started a few days later, just short, cryptic texts at first. Simple things like, I see you, or I'm closer than you think. I blocked the number, but it didn't matter. New messages kept coming from new numbers. I started to feel like I was losing control. It was the same as before. That suffocating feeling of being hunted, of knowing that no matter how far you run, you can't escape the person who won't let go. And it didn't stop there. One night, I came home from work, exhausted but relieved to be out of the office. I had just put my keys in the door when I noticed something odd. The door wasn't completely locked. I froze. I always locked it. Always. I hadn't noticed it being like that when I left, and I definitely hadn't left it that way. Panic started creeping in. Was she here? Had she been here? I pushed the door open slowly, almost too afraid to see what I might find. The apartment was eerily quiet. My heart was thudding in my chest. I checked the living room first, then the bathroom, but there was no sign of anyone. I breathed a little easier, but then I walked into the kitchen. And there she was. Olivia, sitting at my kitchen table, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She was holding a mug of coffee, sipping it casually like we were old friends catching up. Her hair was messy, her clothes were the same ones she always wore when she showed up unannounced. Dark, oversized hoodie and ripped jeans. She was calm, too calm, sitting there like she had every right to be in my apartment. I just stood there, paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how she got in. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to exist in this life I was trying to build for myself. But there she was, and nothing about her seemed off. At least not in a way I could immediately put my finger on. I don't even know how long I stood there staring at her. It felt like hours, but probably only a minute or two. When she finally spoke, her voice calm and almost too sweet, I was too stunned to react. I tried to push past her. I don't even know why. But as soon as I moved toward the door, she got up, blocking my way. She didn't physically stop me, but it was like she was daring me to leave. Like she was saying, I'm not going anywhere. And honestly, I believed her. I didn't even bother calling the cops. What could I say? My ex-girlfriend is sitting in my kitchen, and I don't know why she got in. They wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was crazy. So I stayed in my apartment that night, too scared to sleep, too scared to leave. I just watched her sitting there pretending nothing was wrong. And it didn't end there. The next few days were a blur. She started showing up more often. Not in my apartment, but she'd leave things for me. Notes, odd little trinkets, reminders of the things she knew about me. She started following me around the city. No matter where I went, no matter how much I tried to avoid her, I would turn a corner and there she was. Watching from across the street, hiding in the background of stores, slipping in and out of places when I wasn't looking. I began to feel like I was being hunted, but worse, like I was being stalked by someone who knew me too well. I couldn't keep running. She was everywhere. Eventually, it hit me. Olivia wasn't just some obsessive ex. She was something worse. She was a ghost in my life that I could never shake. And no matter where I went, she'd always find me. I still don't know how she does it. I don't know how she finds me, how she gets into my places, or how she knows everything about my life. But the truth is, I don't need to know anymore. Because I know one thing for sure, Olivia isn't leaving. And neither am I. I don't know what I was expecting when I broke up with Anna. I figured we'd part ways like any normal relationship. It was messy, sure, but we both agreed it was over, and that was supposed to be the end of it. I didn't know that walking away from her would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. Not because I still had feelings for her, but because it was like she refused to let me go. The first sign that something was wrong came a few weeks after I moved out. I had finally started settling into my new place. Just a small apartment, nothing fancy. I hadn't even bothered to hang up many pictures yet, just a couple of random frames I picked up from IKEA. I had a photo of Anna and me from a trip we'd taken a while back, just the two of us in front of some random landmark in the city. It wasn't my favorite photo, but I left it out for sentimental reasons. I didn't think much of it at first when I walked past the photo one morning and saw that Anna's expression seemed different. Like the smile she had in the picture was a little more forced, a little too wide. It was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. You know how sometimes you look at a photo for too long and the expression starts to change in your head. I shrugged it off, telling myself it wasn't that big of a deal. But then it happened again. The next day, I walked past the same photo, and it was worse. The smile was gone. Her eyes looked darker, more intense, and there was something about the way she was staring at the camera at me that felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. It was like the photo had changed on its own, like the expression wasn't just a memory anymore. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe I just needed more sleep, or that I was still adjusting to the new place. But as the days went on, it kept happening. Every time I walked past that photo, Anna's face in the frame would look different. The smile would fade, and the shadows in the photo would get deeper. I started to avoid looking at it, but it didn't matter. Every time I glanced at that frame, something about her would unsettle me. The changes were subtle, like the kind of thing you notice when you're already anxious and looking for something to be wrong. But the more it happened, the more it gnawed at me. Then one night I came home late after work. I was tired, just wanting to crash into bed, but when I walked into the living room, I froze. The photo was off the wall. It was sitting on the coffee table, facing up just like it had been before. But now Anna's face wasn't just different. It was twisted, her eyes were black, and the smile she had was distorted like it wasn't even her anymore. I picked it up, my heart racing, but as soon as I touched it, I felt something cold, almost like a jolt running through me. I dropped it and stepped back. I stared at the frame, trying to figure out what was going on. Had I somehow moved it? Had I been sleepwalking? But the thought didn't make sense. I didn't remember ever taking it down. I would have noticed if I did. It got worse. The next morning, I found more photos. Not just the one on the coffee table, but others too. Little snapshots of Anna and me, photos I didn't even remember having, scattered around my apartment, on the kitchen counter in the bathroom, one tucked into the pages of a book I hadn't read in months. And in every single one, her expression was darker. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure anger. But it wasn't just that. It felt like she was watching me, like she was trying to send me a message through the photos. I knew it didn't make sense, but I was starting to get the feeling that Anna wasn't just in my past. It felt like she was here in my apartment. I don't know how she was doing it, but I couldn't shake the thought that she was somehow still watching me, even though I hadn't seen her since the breakup. I tried calling her once. I left a voicemail just asking her if she was doing this, if she was behind the photos, if she was the one messing with me. I didn't get a response, but I didn't expect one. Anna had always been good at ghosting me when she wanted to. And then things took a turn that I couldn't ignore. One evening I came back from a walk to find that all the photos had been rearranged. The one on the coffee table was now on the mantel, but more importantly, there was a new one. It was a picture of Anna standing in front of my front door, smiling that same unsettling smile she'd been wearing in all the other photos. The weird thing was, the photo wasn't taken by me, and it sure as hell wasn't from my phone. I felt a sickening weight in my stomach as I realized that someone had been inside my apartment. Someone had been watching me, coming into my space without me even knowing it. I locked the door behind me, checked the windows, checked every possible entrance, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises, creaks, and pops from the other side of the apartment. Every time I tried to lie down, I would hear something. And when I would get up to check, everything would be fine. I was losing my mind and I knew it, but I also knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to figure out what was happening. The next day, I decided I was done. I was going to confront her. I didn't care what she had to say. I needed to know how she was getting into my apartment, how she was leaving these photos behind. I called her, left another voicemail, but this time, I just showed up at her apartment. When she opened the door, it was like she was waiting for me. She didn't even look surprised to see me standing there demanding answers. She just smiled, that same unsettling smile. But this time, it wasn't the smile of someone who was sorry or guilty. It was the smile of someone who had already won. She told me that she'd never left, that she was always here, that every time I walked past those photos, she was watching, that she had never truly let go of me, and that she wasn't going anywhere. I didn't understand it. I couldn't, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't lying. I had to get away. I had to get out of that apartment, but as I turned to leave, I knew she would follow. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. In this apartment, it doesn't feel like mine anymore. I don't know if I'll ever get away from Anna, or if I even want to at this point. But I know one thing for sure, she's not leaving, and neither am I. I thought breaking up with Emma would be the end of it. I really did. We'd been together for almost a year, and it had been nothing but manipulation, jealousy, and constant drama. I couldn't even breathe without her freaking out. I didn't even realize how messed up it had gotten until I was out of it. Emma had always been possessive, always too involved in my life. But when I left her, I thought I'd finally gotten away. I thought I'd be free. But I was wrong. It didn't take long before things started feeling off. At first, I brushed it off as stress or maybe just the fact that I was adjusting to life without Emma. I moved into a new apartment, hoping the change of scenery would help me reset. I even started seeing someone new. Her name was Chloe, and she was everything Emma wasn't: calm, kind, and easygoing. I figured this was going to be my fresh start. No more drama, no more control. But then Chloe started noticing the weird stuff. It wasn't huge things at first, just little oddities that you might chalk up to being tired or distracted. Cold spots in the apartment, whispers when no one was around, things moving ever so slightly when we weren't looking, like a book that would shift on the shelf or a chair that was a few inches away from where I had been. Chloe thought I was messing with her at first, like I was playing a prank or being a little too obsessed with the whole new apartment thing. But when it started happening more and more, she got freaked out. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe the apartment had some strange energy to it. But deep down, something told me it wasn't just the apartment. One night, we were watching a movie in the living room, and I swear, the temperature dropped so fast it felt like someone opened the freezer door. Chloe noticed it too. She grabbed a blanket, her breath visible in the air, and said she'd never felt the place this cold before. I didn't know what to say. I told her maybe it was the AC acting up, but I could feel it too. The air wasn't just cold, it was wrong. The whispers started up again that night. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they were faint, like voices in the distance, just on the edge of hearing. Chloe looked at me like I was losing my mind when I said I heard them, but she didn't argue. She just stayed quiet, watching the dark corners of the room, her face pale. The next few days, things got weirder. I started seeing shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. I'd catch something just out of place, like a reflection in the mirror or a shape darting past the door when no one was there. And then one night, I woke up to the sound of someone breathing. It was close, so close it felt like someone was standing right next to me. I opened my eyes, and for a split second, I thought it was Chloe. But then I saw her sleeping beside me, her back to me. The breath was too slow, too deep, and I couldn't move. I just couldn't. It was like I was frozen in place. When I turned my head, there was a figure standing in the doorway. I couldn't make out the details at first, but it was unmistakable, long dark hair, a shadow that was almost familiar. And then the recognition hit me. It was Emma. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She was just there, watching me. My heart was pounding in my chest and I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how long she had been standing there, but it felt like hours. I wanted to move to scream, but all I could do was stare. Emma's eyes were wide open, her face empty, just staring right through me. When I blinked, she was gone, just like that. I don't know if I was hallucinating, if I was just imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. I lay there wide awake, staring at the doorway, listening to the silence. The next day, Chloe asked me if I was okay. I told her I didn't sleep well, that I'd had a bad dream, but I knew she didn't believe me. And honestly, I didn't blame her. I barely believed it myself. But as the days went on, the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Chloe and I were in the kitchen one night when I found a note stuck to the fridge. It was handwritten, the letters shaky, the ink smeared as if someone had rushed through it. You can't escape me. I'll always find you. I thought my heart stopped when I saw it. It wasn't from Chloe, I knew that. It wasn't my handwriting either. And then, as I stood there frozen, I realized something. The handwriting looked eerily familiar. It looked like Emma's. I tried to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking too much. Chloe asked me if I was okay, but I didn't answer. How could I? How could I explain this when I barely understood it myself? Over the next few weeks, the strange things escalated. Chloe started seeing things too. Shadows in the hallway, voices she couldn't place. She would catch glimpses of someone in the windows, but when we checked, there was no one there. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was in the apartment. Something was with us. The worst part, I couldn't get rid of it. No matter how many times I changed the locks, checked the windows, or even went as far as cleaning out every corner of the apartment, it didn't stop. I thought I was just being paranoid, but it wasn't paranoia when you wake up to your ex standing in your doorway watching you sleep. One night, I decided I had to confront this. I wasn't going to let Emma, or whatever this was, continue to haunt me. I stayed up late, sitting in the dark, waiting for anything to happen. Chloe had fallen asleep in the other room. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making your skin crawl. I waited, barely breathing, until I saw it. I saw her again. Emma, standing in the doorway just like before. This time I wasn't frozen. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked toward her, but she didn't move. She just stayed there, her face expressionless, her eyes locked on mine. I tried to speak, to say something, but no words came out. It was like my voice was caught in my throat. And then, as if she heard my thoughts, she smiled. That same twisted, empty smile. And I realized with a cold rush that Emma hadn't just been haunting me. She had never really left. She had been with me the whole time, in every shadow, in every cold spot, in every whisper. I had lost Emma. But I hadn't just lost her. I had lost my safety, my peace. And I don't think I'm ever going to get it back. It's weird how quickly a breakup can turn into something you never thought you were capable of. I never planned to be this obsessed, this controlling, but the moment Ben told me it was over, I knew I couldn't let it go. He said we were toxic, that we weren't good for each other anymore, that he needed space. At first, I didn't want to leave him. I thought maybe he just needed time. But I kept telling myself that it wasn't about him, that I wasn't desperate for him to come back. No, I told myself I just needed closure. That was it. Closure. But closure doesn't really exist when you're still in love with someone, does it? I wasn't content with just letting things fade out. That was enough for me. He didn't know it yet, but I wasn't done. I needed to make him feel it. He had all the power now, but what if I could take it back? What if I could make him feel trapped, the same way I did? I couldn't just let him move on, acting like everything was fine. I wasn't done, and he wasn't either. Not really. It started small at first. I told myself I wasn't stalking him. I was just running into him by chance. I knew his routine, his schedule. His gin was on the way to work, so I'd stop by, not even to get a glimpse of him, just to be in the same space. I didn't expect him to notice, but he did. I saw his face flicker with recognition the first time we crossed paths. I told myself that was all. That was just going there because I needed to get back in shape anyway, that it wasn't weird, I wasn't obsessed. But that feeling, that moment when he saw me and didn't say anything, it stuck with me. It was like a fire that started burning and wouldn't go out. I wanted him to feel awkward. I wanted him to wonder why I was there. I wanted him to feel what I felt. So I started showing up at other places. I'd go to the cafe where we used to sit, the one with the small tables and the old brick walls. The one where I knew the barista knew his name and always made his latte just the way he liked it. I'd sit in the corner with my laptop, pretending to work, but always watching the door. I'd seen him come in looking around like he was expecting to see someone. Every time he walked in and didn't see me, I could almost feel his disappointment, and I loved it. I loved seeing how rattled he looked when he thought I wasn't there. But then it wasn't enough. The whole running into him by chance thing started getting old. It didn't feel like I had control anymore. He was always looking around now, always checking to see if I was there. And when I wasn't, he would leave quickly. The tension was exciting, but I wanted more. I wanted him to feel like I was always there. I wanted him to feel trapped. So I took it further. I stopped pretending. I wasn't just coincidentally at the gym anymore. I was there at the exact times I knew he'd be. I'd park in the lot and wait for him to show up. I would walk in right behind him, pretending like I didn't even see him. I could feel his discomfort as he looked at me, always trying to act like it didn't matter, but I knew it did. Every time, he'd give me that half smile, that awkward, "oh, you again," and walk away. But this time I didn't walk away. I followed. I was close enough that he couldn't avoid me without making a scene. He couldn't ignore me. He started looking for me. I knew he didn't want to admit it, but it was happening. He'd scan the room before settling in on a machine, like he was waiting to see if I was there. And the best part, he'd act like it was fine, like it didn't bother him, but I could see it. I could see the unease in the way he moved, the way his eyes darted around the gym, the way he'd hurry through his sets and rush out the door. That's when I realized something. I didn't just want him back. I didn't even need him to love me anymore. I needed him to feel the same way I did. I needed him to be trapped in this loop of uncertainty and discomfort. I wanted him to feel the same anxiety that had eaten away at me when he started pulling away. I wanted him to think about me constantly, the way I couldn't stop thinking about him. And it worked. There was one night, a few weeks later, when I was sitting at a table in the cafe, the same one we used to sit in together. He walked in looking distracted as usual. But this time he didn't leave right away. He saw me sitting there, and for the first time he walked up to the counter, ordered his drink, and sat down across from me. His face was pale. He didn't look angry, but he didn't look calm either. He looked unsettled. I could tell he was trying to figure out if he should leave, but he stayed. And that was all I needed. For the first time since we broke up, I felt like I had the upper hand. He didn't want to be here, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know how to leave without making it worse. He was trapped, and I was in control. It was intoxicating. After that, I didn't even try to hide it anymore. I'd go to his favorite spots uninvited, always showing up at the worst possible times. I'd show up at the gym when he just finished his workout, or I'd wait by his car when he was leaving just to catch a glimpse of him. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was everywhere. It got to the point where I didn't care if he knew. In fact, I wanted him to know. I wanted him to understand that he couldn't escape me. And the worst part, I wasn't the only one who felt it. He started getting jumpy. He'd check over his shoulder when he thought I wasn't around. His phone would buzz, and he'd glance at it like he was worried I was about to call. I saw him talking to friends, always looking over his shoulder when they mentioned my name. I could feel him pulling away, but I wasn't worried, because now I wasn't chasing him. He was chasing me. I wasn't just watching him anymore. I was controlling him. I had become the thing he feared, and there was nothing he could do about it. The thing is, Ben never wanted to admit it, but he needed me. Maybe not in the way I needed him, but I could see it. He couldn't go on pretending that I wasn't in his head, that I wasn't always just there. I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. It's been 3 months since I broke up with Lucy. 3 months, and I should have been over it by now, right? I mean, we ended things pretty cleanly. At least that's what I thought. But every time I checked my phone, opened my mailbox, or even stepped out of my apartment, I had this sinking feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake it. Something was off. It started slow at first, just a random email. "See you at your favorite bar tonight," it said. I didn't respond. Thought it was weird, but maybe it was a mistake, right? Maybe it was just someone who happened to know I liked that place. Could have been a coincidence. But then the text started. "I've got tickets to that concert you've been talking about for months. You should totally go." It was the kind of thing that only Lucy would have known. The kind of thing that she would have remembered, and I hadn't told anyone about it since we broke up. I didn't know how she was finding out this stuff. At first, I figured maybe she was just lurking on my social media or something. But then I got a letter in the mailbox, handwritten. "I'm going to the cafe we used to go to tomorrow. I hope you'll be there." I didn't even bother responding. I didn't want to engage. I didn't want to get caught up in whatever game she was playing. But the messages kept coming. Texts, emails, even more letters. Each one made it seem like she knew exactly where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. It wasn't just creepy. It was suffocating. She was everywhere, like I couldn't escape her. She was controlling the narrative. And the worst part was, she made it seem like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the one overreacting. I tried to ignore it, thinking if I just didn't respond, it would stop. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to stop. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lucy wasn't just sending these messages by accident. She was orchestrating everything. She wanted me to know that she was still there, watching me. And she wasn't going anywhere until she got what she wanted. A few weeks ago, I tried to escape it. A party came up. I'd get together with some friends I hadn't seen in a while. I figured if I went out, maybe I could clear my head for a bit. Maybe I could forget about all the weird stuff that had been happening. The party was at this guy, Jake's apartment. He lived in this big kind of rundown place in the middle of the city. It was one of those places you go to because it's cheap, but also because the music is loud enough that you can't hear yourself think. I walked in just happy to be somewhere else, somewhere where I didn't have to think about the messages, the letters, Lucy. I saw a few familiar faces, grabbed a drink, and tried to enjoy myself. It was nice being around people who didn't know anything about my past with Lucy. For a while, I was able to just relax. But then I saw her. I didn't even recognize her at first. She was standing in the corner, her back slightly turned, like she was trying not to be seen. But I knew it was her. I would have known her anywhere. The same blonde hair, the same sharp jawline, that same smile I used to fall for. Except this time there was something off about it. It wasn't just that she was there, though that was enough to make my stomach drop. No, it was the way she was watching me. It was like she was watching me too closely, like she knew exactly where I'd be, who I'd be with, and when I'd show up. I didn't want to confront her. I really didn't. I had no idea how she'd found out about this party, but part of me already knew the answer. She probably knew everything. I tried to ignore her, just enjoy the night, but that wasn't happening. Every time I turned around, there she was, standing in the corner watching me. Her eyes never left me, not even when she was talking to other people. I could feel it. It was like she was controlling the whole room, like everyone else was just a backdrop to her plan. Eventually, I couldn't take any more. I walked over to her, thinking if I just confronted her, maybe I could get some closure. Maybe I could make her leave me alone. But when I stood in front of her, I couldn't believe what I saw. She was smiling like nothing had ever happened. Her eyes looked wide and calm, and there was this almost sweet look on her face, like she wasn't some kind of crazy stalker, like we were still together. It was like she was playing a part in some twisted drama, and I was the one who had messed up the script. I asked her why she was here. She told me she just wanted to see me again. That was it. She said it with a soft voice, like she was just a friend, like we could just pick up where we left off. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was so angry, but I was also terrified. She wasn't acting like she was just trying to get back with me. No, it was deeper than that. She wasn't looking for closure. She wasn't looking for a relationship. She was controlling everything. She had been in control all along, even after we broke up. It wasn't until later that night when I was lying in bed and unable to sleep that I fully realized what she'd done. She hadn't just shown up at the party like it was some kind of coincidence. She had orchestrated it. She knew I would be there. She knew who I would be with. She knew everything about me, every move I made, and she had made sure I couldn't escape her. Every message, every text, every letter was part of her plan, and I had fallen right into it. The worst part, I didn't know how to make it stop. How could I tell anyone? How could I prove that she was stalking me when she acted so sweet and innocent? How could I explain to anyone that Lucy had been planning this, pulling the strings, making sure I knew that she was still there, still in control? The next few days, the messages kept coming. More texts, more emails, more letters. Every single one felt like a threat, even though none of them said anything explicit. I hope you had fun at the party, one text read. I've been to that bar too, just to check it out. You always have the best taste in places. It was like she knew what I was doing before I did. She was always one step ahead, and the worst part, she was still in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about what she was doing, about how she was watching me. She wasn't going to stop. I knew that now, and the worst part, I didn't know how to escape. Lucy wasn't just trying to get me back. She was trying to control me. She was trying to make me see that no matter how far I ran, no matter how many times I tried to ignore her, she would always be there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea how to get out of it. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd get obsessed with a breakup. Sure, it sucked, but I figured I'd move on. It's what people do, right? You break up, you feel bad for a while, and eventually you start fresh. That's what I thought when I broke up with Beth. I packed up my stuff, found a new apartment, and tried to bury the whole thing. I told myself that a change of scenery would help, that it would be like hitting the reset button on my life. But the weird thing is, the more I tried to move on, the more it felt like she was still there. I don't know what it was that night, but I was cleaning out some boxes in the new place when I found an old photo of us. I didn't remember it. It was from a trip we'd taken years ago, one of those cheap weekend getaways. We were smiling, holding up drinks, looking like we were having a good time. But as I looked closer, something caught my eye. In the background, just outside of the frame, there was something that didn't make sense. Beth. Her face was pressed against the window of the cabin we'd stayed in, her eyes wide, staring straight at the camera. It was so out of place, it took me a second to even process it. I hadn't seen her in months. We hadn't spoken in weeks after I ended things. How could she have been there? I didn't remember her being there when the picture was taken. And even if she had been, how had I not noticed her face behind the glass when I first looked at it? I shook my head, chalking it up to some weird coincidence, maybe a trick of the light or something. But that's when it started happening more often. Over the next few weeks, it was like she was everywhere. Photos started showing up around my apartment. Old pictures I didn't remember keeping and new ones I couldn't have taken. There was one of me sitting on the couch with my laptop looking bored. Behind me, out of focus but still clearly visible, was her, Beth, her face partially obscured by the doorway, just watching me from the other side. Another one showed me walking back from the corner store, holding a bag of groceries, and again she was there standing across the street in the shadows. The worst part, I hadn't posted any of these pictures anywhere. They were private moments. No one else had access to my phone, my computer, my life, except for her. I asked my friends if any of them had sent them, trying to play it cool, not letting on that I was getting freaked out. But none of them had any idea what I was talking about. The photos weren't from social media. They weren't from anything I had shared with anyone. It was like they had just appeared. At first, I convinced myself that maybe it was just some weird prank. Maybe someone had hacked my phone, taken the pictures, and started sending them to me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I'd checked every file on my phone and laptop. There was no record of me taking those pictures. Nothing added up. I started feeling like I was losing my mind. I couldn't escape her. It wasn't just the photos. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. It was the little things. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel like someone was watching me, like I wasn't alone in my own apartment. Sometimes I'd hear something in the hallway, a faint sound like footsteps, and I'd rush to the door to see if someone was outside. but there'd be nothing. Just the empty hallway. I started getting paranoid. I kept checking the locks on my doors and windows every time I left. I'd stand there just staring at them, wondering if I was being followed. Wondering if she was out there somewhere, just waiting for me to slip up. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep. Every time I left the apartment, I felt like someone was right behind me, just out of sight. It got to the point where I couldn't even trust myself. I'd walk down the street, and for a split second, I'd swear I saw her, her hair, her face, her eyes, always just a blur, a shadow moving in the corner of my vision. But when I turned around, there'd be nothing there. And every time, that feeling would sink deeper into my stomach. The worst part, the photos kept coming. One day, I came home from work to find a new picture in the envelope by my door. This one was different. It was from a night I'd spent with some coworkers at a bar. I'd been tipsy, laughing with some friends. And in the background, there she was again. Beth. Standing in the corner, barely visible, but I could see her. She was smiling, just like the old days, but there was something wrong with her smile. It wasn't the way she used to look at me. It wasn't sweet. It was empty cold. I didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't keep living like this, looking over my shoulder every time I went out, wondering if I was being watched. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. It was like Beth had become a part of my life again, even though I tried so hard to leave her behind. I started taking extra precautions. I made sure to go to different places, change up my routine, but nothing seemed to work. I'd always catch a glimpse of her, just for a second, in a crowd or across the street. It was as if she was everywhere, always there watching me. One night, I couldn't take any more. I decided I was going to confront her once and for all. I hadn't seen her in person since the breakup, and I needed answers. So I went to the one place I thought I might find her, the cafe we used to go to. The place where we'd spent so many mornings talking over coffee, where we laughed, where everything had felt so normal before it all fell apart. When I walked in, my heart skipped a beat. There she was, sitting at a table by the window, just like old times. But the moment I looked at her, I froze. Her eyes weren't just looking at me, they were staring. It was like she was waiting for me, knowing I'd show up, like she was always one step ahead. She didn't smile or wave like I thought she would. She just watched me, her gaze piercing through the space between us, like she'd been watching me for a long time. I turned and walked out before I could say anything. I couldn't breathe. It was like every ounce of air had been sucked out of the room. But I knew something then. I knew I wasn't just imagining things. I wasn't losing my mind. Beth had been here all along, watching, waiting. The worst part is I still don't know how she did it, how she knew where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. But I know one thing for sure, Beth wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. She was still out there in the shadows, always watching, always waiting, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. I'll never understand what made me stay with her as long as I did. I mean, sure, she had this way of pulling me in, playing all sweet like she needed me, like I was the only person who could fix her. But after everything ended, I thought I was free. I thought it was over. And for a while, I was. I moved into a new place, kept busy, and tried to shake off the constant feeling of her looming over me. But after a few months, I started getting these weird messages. Not the kind of messages you get from friends. These felt like reminders. It started with a text. It was simple at first, like a normal message you'd get from someone who had your number and maybe didn't have the guts to talk face to face. But that's when the weirdness started. It wasn't just a normal, "Hey, how are you?" It was more like a, "Hey, I saw you at the coffee shop today. Hope you're doing okay." But the thing is, I hadn't been at that coffee shop. I hadn't even mentioned it to anyone. At first, I brushed it off. Could have been a coincidence. Or maybe someone I knew just happened to be there at the same time, right? But then the next message came. It was even stranger. "I know you've been spending a lot of time at the gym lately. You've been looking good." Now, I'm the type of person who keeps a low profile, especially when I'm at the gym. I'm not one of those people who posts gym selfies or brags about workouts on social media. I don't even talk to many people at the gym. So how would anyone know I'd been there, let alone how much time I've been spending there? I started freaking out. I changed my gym routine, started going at odd hours, but the messages didn't stop. They kept coming, each one more personal than the last. At some point, I realized that whoever was sending these messages knew everything about me. Where I went, what I did, who I was with. It felt like they were following me, but I couldn't figure out how. Then the photos started showing up. First, it was an email, I opened it with some dread already in my stomach, but when I saw the picture, I couldn't process it at first. It was a photo of me at the park, sitting on a bench just reading a book. I was completely unaware of it being taken, but there I was looking perfectly relaxed, like everything was normal. But the kicker, in the corner of the photo, right behind the tree, I could just make out a figure. It was hard to see, but I knew that face. It was her, Beth, standing just outside of the frame, her eyes trained directly on me. I didn't recognize her clothes, so I figured it had to be an old photo, something from when we were together. But there was no way she could have been at that park with me. The last time I saw her, I made sure to block every way for her to contact me, including her social media. We had an ugly breakup. I moved to a new city. She wasn't supposed to be in my life anymore. But the photo told a different story. I was paranoid now. I checked the locks, double-checked the windows at night like some scared kid. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That's what happened. I came home from work one evening to find a small package waiting for me outside my door. I picked it up, my heart racing. Inside, there was another picture. This one was even weirder. It was of me leaving my apartment building, something I didn't even remember happening. The worst part, there was a figure in the background, a little blurry, but I could tell it was her again. I took out my phone and checked my security footage. The camera showed me walking out of the building as usual, but there was no one following me. So how did she get that photo? I went into full panic mode at that point. I tried to call the police, but they just told me there was nothing they could do unless I had proof of harassment. I didn't want to make myself sound insane, so I didn't tell them about the photos or the weird messages. I tried to let it go, but the things kept happening. Every time I thought I was in the clear, another message would pop up. Saw you at the grocery store today. The checkout line was long, huh? It made my skin crawl. She was out there watching me, but I never saw her. And then it all came to a head one night. I had been out with some friends trying to get my mind off everything. When I got back to my apartment, I wasn't expecting anything strange. But when I walked through the door, my stomach dropped. There, sitting on my couch, was a stack of photos. All of them were pictures of me, taken when I wasn't looking, doing normal, everyday stuff. At the park, at the store, even in the lobby of my apartment building. And right there, at the bottom of the stack, was one final picture. It was from my own kitchen. I was sitting at the table, my back to the camera, but behind me, there she was again. Beth, standing in the doorway, watching me. I don't know how long she'd been in my apartment. I didn't even know how she'd gotten in. But it hit me then. It wasn't just stalking. She'd been here. She'd been in my life the whole time. The last picture was the hardest to stomach. I was in bed sleeping. The lights were off, and the only thing visible was the outline of my body under the covers. But there was something else there. A shadow. A figure standing by the foot of the bed. I knew immediately who it was. Beth. I don't know how she'd been getting in. Maybe she had a key. Maybe she'd been sneaking around for weeks. But there was no denying it. She wasn't just watching me from a distance anymore. She was here, in my life, in my space, where I was supposed to feel safe. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up, back against the wall, staring at the door, waiting for something. Anything. The next morning, I packed a bag, grabbed what I could, and left. I couldn't stay there anymore. I didn't even care where I went, just as long as it was far from her. I haven't seen her since. I haven't gotten any messages, no more photos. But I still check the locks at night. I still look over my shoulder when I'm out. I still feel her presence somewhere, just behind me. It's like she never really left. It started out like any other breakup, or at least I thought it would. I ended things with Mia because it was the right thing to do. She was controlling, manipulative, and constantly made me feel like I was walking on eggshells. It was exhausting. I thought once it was over, I could move on with my life, leave all the drama behind, and just breathe. I was wrong. A few weeks after we split, the first message came. It was a simple text, something like, "You think I'm gone, but I'm always with you." At first, I thought it was just Mia being petty. After all, it wasn't like she was ever good at handling rejection. I didn't even respond. I just deleted it and went on with my day. But then more messages started coming. They weren't long, but they were weird enough to mess with your head. Riddles, phrases that didn't make sense, like, "The shadows follow you," or "Every time you think of me, I'm closer." Each one was unsettling, but not enough to make me panic. I told myself she was just trying to get in my head. That's what she did best, right? It wasn't until the voicemail that things started feeling real. I was sitting in my room one night just scrolling through my phone when I saw a missed call from an unknown number. I didn't recognize it, but something in my gut told me to listen to the voicemail. I don't know why, but I did. The moment I hit play, I felt my stomach drop. The voice on the other end was hers, but it wasn't. It was distorted, like someone was playing it through a filter. She sounded off. It was hard to explain, but it was like her voice was stretching and warping. "I've been here the whole time," and she said, "Every time you think I'm gone, I'm closer." I froze. The words echoed in my head long after the voicemail ended. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was she serious? I tried to push it out of my mind, but it was like a seed had been planted, and no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next few days felt off. It wasn't just the messages anymore. I began seeing her face. At first, it was in my dreams, just flashes of her staring at me with that weird, knowing look she always had. But it didn't stop there. I started seeing her in public in crowds. I'd be walking down the street, and for a split second, I'd see her face in the window of a passing car or in the reflection of a store window. My heart would race and I'd turn around, but of course, she was never there. The worst part, I started hearing her voice in my head. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to mess with me. "You'll never escape me," it would whisper when I was alone. Sometimes it was just a faint echo, but other times it felt like she was right behind me. I could almost feel her breath on the back of my neck. I couldn't get away from her, not even in my own mind. I started questioning if I was losing it. Was I just imagining things? Was I making it all up in my head? I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they all brushed me off. "You're just overthinking it," they'd say. "It's been weeks since you broke up. She'll move on eventually." But I knew something was off. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I started getting paranoid. I checked my locks at night, not because I thought she'd show up physically, but because I felt like she was still there, watching me. It was like she had somehow infiltrated every part of my life, even the spaces where I thought I was safe. I kept finding more messages, and each one was more unsettling than the last. One night, I was in bed trying to sleep, but the feeling of her presence was overwhelming. I could feel her even though she wasn't there. I turned to look at the clock, 3:00 a.m. That's when I heard the sound. A soft scratching noise like fingernails against the wall. My breath caught in my throat. I was too scared to move, but I couldn't just lie there and pretend like I didn't hear it. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The scratching stopped as soon as I moved, but the tension in the air was thick. I checked on windows. Nothing. My door was locked. I was alone. The next day, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one was different, though. It wasn't the usual cryptic message. This one was a drawing. It was me standing in my apartment, but there was something off about it. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but then it hit me. In the background, just barely visible through the window, was her. Mia. Her face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide open, staring directly at me. The message beneath the drawing read, "I've been here the whole time. You just don't see me." I stared at the drawing for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. How could she have known what my apartment looked like, down to the smallest details? How had she gotten this drawing to me? It wasn't possible. There was no way she could have been there without me noticing. That's when I realized she wasn't just watching me anymore. She had invaded my life in ways I couldn't explain. Her presence wasn't just physical. It was in my mind, in my dreams, in every corner of my apartment. She was everywhere. I tried blocking her on every platform. Texts, emails, social media, but it didn't matter. The messages kept coming. Every time I thought I was safe, I find another letter or another drawing, always more personal than the last. It was like she knew exactly what I was thinking, what I was doing, and no matter how far I tried to run, she was always one step ahead. I couldn't escape her. Even when I tried to forget about her, she was there in the background of everything I did. It felt like I was being controlled, like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I started to wonder if Mia had always been this way, if I had just never noticed it before. But now there was no escaping it. She wasn't just an ex. She was a part of my life, and she wasn't going anywhere. I don't know what's worse, the fact that she's always watching, or the fact that I can't even trust my own mind anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, and every time I try to move forward, I feel her pulling me back. I'm trapped, and I don't know how much longer I can take it. Mia isn't gone. Not really. I don't think she ever will be. I never thought breaking up with Lisa would be anything more than just, well, a breakup. You know how it goes. Things don't work out, you part ways, and life moves on. It was my first serious relationship, and yeah, it ended messily, but I figured that was the end of it. I thought I'd be able to just leave it behind me like a bad chapter in a book I'd never read again. But a few weeks after we ended things, I started getting these letters. They were normal at first, just a couple of lines, nothing crazy. I thought maybe it was her way of trying to find closure. I didn't respond to any of them. But the letters kept coming, and as they piled up, so did the weirdness. The first one was simple enough. It was just her telling me she missed me, and that she'd hope I was doing okay. I didn't think much of it. A little clingy, sure, but whatever. But then the next letter came a few days later, and that's when I started to feel uneasy. She knew details, things I hadn't told anyone. She mentioned how I'd been going to the coffee shop near my apartment every morning, one I liked because it was quiet, and how I'd been wearing that same jacket I wore on our first date, even though it was a little worn out now. At first, I thought it was a fluke. I'd just run into her one day at the coffee shop, maybe seen her on the street or something. Maybe she'd been paying attention without me noticing. But then things started to get stranger. The letters got longer, more specific. I'd be talking to a friend, and the next letter would mention something about the conversation, down to the details. I hadn't posted any of this stuff online, no social media updates, nothing. It was like she was watching me. I tried ignoring it. What else could I do? If I changed my routine, she might just follow me somewhere else. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in the last letter I got. That's when things really hit me. It was a drawing of me walking in my apartment. I could tell it was a drawing because of the shaky lines, but the weird thing was it was so detailed. She had even gotten the color of my shirt right. How did she know what I was wearing? And then, in the corner of the drawing, there were words. I know exactly what you're doing. You're still mine. I sat there staring at it for a while, trying to figure out how she knew. I hadn't told her where I lived. I hadn't posted about my apartment anywhere. There's no way she could have known the details of what I was doing unless she'd been watching me. It got to the point where I couldn't go anywhere without feeling like I was being watched. I'd walk down the street, glance over my shoulder, and feel that weird paranoid itch in the back of my mind, like someone was just behind me. Every time I passed a car, I'd glance inside to see if she was sitting there. Every person I saw felt like she could be her in disguise, lurking around the corner. I couldn't escape it. I changed my phone number. I blocked her on everything. But the letters kept coming. It was like she knew where I was no matter what I did. And then one night, I had the worst scare. I was getting ready for bed, just about to pull the covers over me, when I heard this faint scratching sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, maybe a tree branch rubbing against the window, but the sound got louder. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing, and ran over to the window. I pulled back the curtains, half expecting to see her standing out there staring in. But when I looked out, the street was empty. Nothing. No one. I took a deep breath and went back to bed, trying to shake it off. But something told me to check the window one last time. I pulled the blinds back again, and that's when I saw it. A small slip of paper wedged between the window and the frame. My hand started shaking as I pulled it out. It was a note written in the same handwriting as the letters. I could almost feel my skin crawl as I read it. You'll never get away from me. I froze. There was no way she could have gotten inside. My apartment was locked tight. But how did that note get there? I wasn't even sure what to do anymore. I called the police, but they told me there wasn't much they could do. The letters weren't enough to prove anything. I couldn't exactly tell them, hey, my ex is stalking me and leaving me creepy drawings and notes. They'd think I was crazy, and honestly, I felt like I was going crazy too. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Every noise felt amplified. I couldn't sleep without checking the locks multiple times. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard something, only to find nothing. But deep down, I knew she was out there, watching. I stopped going to my usual spots. I started taking different routes home, walking in zigzags, trying to confuse whoever was following me. I even started leaving the lights on in my apartment when I went out, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it would make her think I was home. I had a couple of friends come over to stay with me for a while, but it didn't help. I still felt like I was being hunted, like there was no escaping it, no escaping her. And the worst part, the letters didn't stop. Every time I thought I'd gotten a little bit of peace, there was another one. Eventually, I stopped looking for answers. I stopped asking questions because I knew Liza wasn't just stalking me. She had gotten inside my head. She was in my life again in a way that I couldn't explain. And no matter what I did, she wasn't going anywhere. Even now, when I'm alone in my apartment, I still check the locks. I still look out the windows just to make sure she's not there. Because deep down, I know she's still out there. And the worst part, she's not letting go. When I first moved into my new apartment, I thought I was finally escaping the past. Carl and I had broken up months earlier, and while I'd never describe our relationship as toxic, it wasn't far from it. We had our share of bad times, mostly his need to control everything I did, and I needed a clean break. The idea of starting over was the only thing that kept me going, so when I found this place, a small but cozy one-bedroom near the city center, I jumped on it. The first few weeks were great. I was finally alone, not having to check my phone every few minutes or worry about what Carl was thinking when I went out with friends. The apartment itself was perfect, quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where I could relax and just exist without anyone breathing down my neck. I started spending more time out of the apartment at work, hanging out with friends, or just walking around the city. It felt good to be free. But then weird things started happening. At first, I thought I was imagining it. You know how it is when you're not used to a new place. You get paranoid. My furniture would be moved ever so slightly, like an inch or two, and I'd think, maybe I just forgot if it shifted it earlier. The curtains would be drawn in a different way than I remembered, or the door would shut all the way like someone had left it ajar. But it wasn't always like that. It would be just enough to make me second guess myself, like I was losing my mind or something. One evening I came home from work and noticed a smell. It was faint, but it was there. A cologne. Something that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't place it at first. It wasn't Carl's scent, but I was still on edge, and for some reason that smell hit me like a punch in the gut. I started to wonder if I had left something on or if my neighbor had used a hallway air freshener again. But then, as I walked into my bedroom, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under my bed. I bent down to pull it out, thinking it was just a receipt or something, but when I saw the handwriting, my stomach dropped. It was Carl's. I froze, reading the note over and over. It wasn't much, just a simple line that sent chills through me. I know you're tired, but I'm here. You'll see. I stared at the note for way too long, not sure if I was just overthinking things. Maybe it was a joke, a sick prank, or something Carl wrote before we broke up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The first thing I did was check the locks. Every single one of them. The front door, the windows, everything. I spent hours double checking, but nothing seemed out of place. I convinced myself it was all in my head. The note was just a mistake, but I couldn't ignore that gut feeling like something wasn't right. A few days later, I came back from work again, and this time the feeling was stronger. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but it felt like I wasn't alone in my own apartment. I went straight to the living room, then the kitchen, checking all the doors and windows once again. Nothing was visibly out of place, but there was that same unsettling feeling. That smell again, too. It wasn't until I decided to check the building's security footage that things took a terrifying turn. The apartment building I lived in had cameras in the hallways, so I thought, why not? I'd never bothered with them before, but at this point, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe I could find some answer, some explanation for all the weirdness. So I contacted the building manager, who was nice enough to send over the footage for the last month. I started with the earliest video. For a few minutes, it was just me coming and going from my apartment, doing regular things. But then, there he was, Carl. He appeared one night when I was clearly not home, about a week after I'd moved in. At first, I thought it was a fluke, a mistake, but then I saw him again the next night, and again, and again. Carl was sneaking into my apartment every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I'd be at work, and he'd be there slipping inside. He was so careful, so calculated. The footage showed him walking in, checking every corner of the place like he was making sure no one had touched anything. Sometimes he'd just sit there looking around, almost like he was just watching. The worst part was that sometimes he'd leave, but other times he'd stay for hours. There was footage of him lying on my couch, staring at my TV, or pacing around like he was waiting for something. I couldn't even breathe as I watched him. I couldn't understand why. He had no reason to be there. We'd broken up. He had his own life. Why was he doing this? That night, I stayed up late, glued to the footage, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. One night, he was in my apartment and I came home early. I could see it in the footage. I walked up the stairs, unlocked my door, and Carl was there, hiding in the shadows of the living room. I didn't even see him, but he saw me. I wanted to throw up, to scream, but all I could do was sit there in disbelief. It wasn't just that he was breaking into my apartment. It was that he had been watching me, watching my life from the sidelines. I felt completely trapped. The apartment that was supposed to be my safe haven was now a place of constant fear. I didn't even know what to do. I called the police, but when I explained the situation, they didn't take me seriously at first. They told me it was hard to prove someone had been trespassing without catching them in the act. It wasn't until I showed them the footage that they finally took it seriously. But by then, Carl had disappeared. I'd never heard from him again after that night. He vanished like he was never there. The police couldn't find him, and the cameras went back to showing nothing. But I knew the truth. Carl was still out there somewhere. He'd been living in the shadows of my life, and now I couldn't escape him. I'm still here in the same apartment, and every time I come home, I still get that feeling that something's wrong. Sometimes I think I hear someone moving around, or I'll find something out of place. But I know that's just my mind playing tricks on me, right? Still, I can't shake the feeling that Carl's watching. I don't think he's ever really gone. I swear I thought I was done with Logan. It had been months, long enough for me to finally feel like I could breathe again, like I was moving on. But then one day the call started. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just some random number showing up on my phone while I was at work, and I figured it was a telemarketer or some scam. I didn't pick up, but the voicemail was the weird part. I didn't recognize the voice, but it sounded like someone familiar, someone I couldn't place right away. But then the words hit me. Hey, I see you're still going to that coffee shop every Friday at 3. Don't forget to get the caramel latte. I know you like it extra hot. I nearly dropped my phone. Who the hell knew that? I had barely told anyone that, let alone a complete stranger. I thought it was just some messed up coincidence, so I shrugged it off. But then the calls kept coming. I got a few more during the week, different numbers, some blocked, others just random. Each time I picked up, I could hear someone breathing at first, and they'd hang up. I felt uneasy, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. People prank call all the time, right? But then the voice came again, and this time I recognized it immediately. It was Logan's voice. I don't know why, but I answered. At first, the voice on the other end denied being Logan. Who is this? He asked, sounding too calm. He even tried to play it cool, like it was someone I knew or should know. I felt like I was losing my mind. I asked if it was Logan, but he just kept denying it, saying he didn't know who I was talking about. But the thing was, he knew. He knew things. Little things. Things only Logan would know about me. Like how I liked my pizza. Extra cheese, no mushrooms. How I'd been trying to get into yoga for the past few weeks. He even mentioned the new jacket I had bought, the deep cream one I'd worn only a couple of times. At first, I thought maybe someone had been following me, but how could they know those details? I ended up blocking the number, thinking that would solve it. But no, the calls just kept coming, and they got weirder. Sometimes the voice would be on a blocked line, and other times, it'd be from random area codes I didn't recognize. And each time the voice would just know things about my day, about my life. I started feeling crazy, like maybe I was making it all up. I began checking my apartment, going through every corner of it, looking for something, anything, that could explain how this person was getting so close to me. But there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no hidden cameras, no trace of anyone. I started to sleep with my phone on silent, my apartment locked up tight, but that didn't stop the feeling. The calls didn't stop either. It just became more unsettling. Sometimes the voice would get closer to me, like it was right in my ear, and I'd hear things I couldn't explain, like whispers, faint giggles, or even sounds in what seemed like footsteps following me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront Logan. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. So I did the next best thing and showed up at his apartment. I was shaking by the time I got there. Part of me was scared of what I'd find, but part of me just needed answers. When he opened the door, I saw the confusion on his face, but there was something else too, something that felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew immediately he wasn't the one calling me. I asked him point blank, Logan, are you behind these calls? I know it's you. Why are you doing this? He looked at me like I was insane. He said he hadn't called me, that I was just paranoid. And honestly, its reaction almost made me second guess everything. What if I was overreacting? What if this was all in my head? But then I remembered the details, things only he would know. I pressed him harder, but he just kept denying it. I swear, I haven't called you, he said. I don't even have your number anymore. You're just freaking out. I felt stupid, like I was grasping at straws, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Logan wasn't the one calling me, but someone was, and they knew too much. The next few weeks were even worse. I couldn't get away from it. The calls didn't stop, and the things the voice said were getting creepier. I saw you leaving work today. You looked tired. I can tell you're stressed about that meeting tomorrow. You should take a nap, get some rest. How could someone know that? How could they know exactly what I was doing? One call, the voice even said, "You're about to get into your car, aren't you? You're thinking about going to the gym, but you're too tired. You're just going to drive straight home." That's when I lost it. I couldn't sit around pretending like this was normal anymore. So I called the police. They looked into it, but it didn't go anywhere. They traced the calls to different numbers and blocked lines, but none of them led back to anything concrete. They couldn't find anything or anyone. It was like the person on the other end didn't exist. I stopped going to places I liked. I stopped going out at night. I started avoiding certain streets. The calls, though, they never stopped. They never got any better. They only got worse, more personal, more invasive. It's been months now. I don't know what's real anymore. The calls are still coming. The voice never changes, but it always knows. Sometimes I don't pick up at all. Other times I just sit there listening to the silence. The worst part, I still have no clue how they're doing it, how they know what I'm doing, where I am, what's happening in my life. And Logan, he still denies everything. But I'm starting to wonder if he's involved in some way. Maybe he's just pretending to be innocent, or maybe he's not even aware of what's really happening. I can't escape it. I used to think I was safe, that things were over. But now, every time the phone rings, I can't help but feel like someone's watching me. Someone who knows everything. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending I'm in control. I didn't think about the phone for months. It was a cheap, clunky thing Jacob had given me when we were still together. He probably picked it up off some bargain shelf. But at the time, I acted all excited like it was a big deal. It wasn't. Just a phone with bad service and a cracked screen. Nothing to get sentimental over. After we broke up, I tossed it in the back of my drawer and forgot about it. Life moved on, and I didn't think much about the old things that had come with him. There were too many other things to focus on. My job, my friends, my apartment. But one day, months later, I was sorting through some old stuff in my room, trying to clean out the clutter, and I found that phone again. I figured I'd plug it in, see if there were any old contacts or numbers I needed to delete. Maybe there was a picture or two I could get rid of to stop thinking about everything that came with it. But when I turned it on, I knew something was wrong right away. The screen lit up with a weird notification, something I didn't recognize. It wasn't any of the apps I'd ever installed. In fact, the entire home screen looked off. There were apps I definitely hadn't downloaded. Things like Camera Plus app that I didn't remember ever seeing before. I tried to close it, but then it opened by itself. I was already feeling uneasy, like something was off, but I figured it was probably just a glitch. Maybe some weird software had been pre-installed. But when I tapped to look at the pictures in the camera roll, my stomach dropped. There were photos. Photos of me. And not just any photos. These were recent. Some of them looked like they were taken when I was at home, sitting on the couch, looking down at my phone. I hadn't even noticed someone was in the room. Other photos were of me cooking in the kitchen, a few of me lying in bed, my eyes closed. My own face taken while I was sleeping. It hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just a malfunction. Someone had been taking these pictures, and I immediately knew who Jacob. I didn't waste any time. I went straight into the settings to delete the app. There was no reason for it to be there, no reason why it should have been active. But when I clicked delete and turned the phone off, I felt a weird sense of relief, like I could breathe again. Maybe it was just some kind of glitch, right? Wrong. The next day, the app reappeared. Same icon, same name. And when I opened it again, there were even more photos. The panic set in. I had to be imagining it. There was no way. I checked the camera roll, and sure enough, there were even more pictures. Some of them were from when I'd gone out for a walk a few days ago. A few of me standing in a crosswalk, looking down at my shoes. A few more of me walking into the grocery store. Even a picture of me sitting at the park bench reading a book. I didn't see anyone. How could I have missed someone following me? That's when I realized. Jacob had put Spyler on the phone. Somehow he managed to install an app that tracked me. It wasn't just about the pictures anymore. It was about knowing everything I did. He knew where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't some old mistake. This was intentional. Jacob had been watching me, and worse still, I had no idea how long he had been doing it. I started thinking about all little things that had felt off in the months since we broke it up. The times had gotten strange, cryptic messages on social media. The random times I'd feel like someone was watching me. But when I turned around, no one was there. The weird coincidence of him knowing where I was when I didn't tell him. Was this all part of his plan? Was he still somehow keeping tabs on me? The more I thought about it, the worse it got. I couldn't just leave the phone sitting around. But what was I supposed to do with it? I couldn't just throw it away. He'd know if I did. Jacob was too smart for that. He wanted back. He'd find a way to get it. And if I told someone, who would believe me? No one would understand how terrifying it was to know someone was out there watching you, controlling your life from behind a screen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I drove out to the nearest lake and tossed the phone in. I watched it sink beneath the water, feeling the weight of it leave my hands, but also the weight of everything it represented. Maybe that would be the end of it. Maybe it would stop. But then the call started. It wasn't the phone that gave it away. It was the voice. I hadn't heard from Jacob in months, and the last thing I wanted was to hear from him again. But then one night, when I was sitting on my couch trying to relax after a long day, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe it was a telemarketer or some random wrong number. But when I picked up, there was no one on the other end. Just breathing. It was the same sound I heard before. Quiet, steady, like someone was listening, waiting for me to say something. I hung up, heart pounding. But it didn't stop there. The calls kept coming, every few days, always from different numbers. Sometimes anonymous, sometimes just random area codes. But the voice was always the same, always his voice. I tried blocking them. I tried turning my phone off entirely. But every time, the calls kept coming. The voice would be there, whispering things that made me freeze. You think I don't know where you are. You think I know everything. He was watching again. Somehow he was still tracking me, still able to find a way to invade my life, even though I thought I had gotten rid of everything. That's when I realized the worst part. Jacob wasn't just playing games. He wasn't just trying to mess with my head. He was trying to make sure I knew he was still there, still in control. Even if I got rid of the phone, he'd always find a way to make his presence known. I could run, but he'd follow me, no matter how far I went. I don't know how to stop it. How to get away from it. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never trust another gift from someone again. I used to think breaking up with Philip would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. We were together for almost 2 years, and during that time, I got so caught up in his neediness, his constant questioning, and the way he tried to control everything from what I wore to where I went, that I almost didn't see it coming. I didn't realize just how bad it had gotten until one day I woke up and felt suffocated. It was like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think without him in my head, weighing me down with his expectations. So I ended it. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. But that freedom didn't last as long as I hoped. At first, I was just relieved. No more checking in all the time, no more silent treatment if I went out with friends, no more hearing about how I wasn't doing enough, or how I should act more like a girlfriend in his eyes. But as the days passed, little things started happening that didn't sit right with me. It was so small at first that I chalked it up to coincidence. I went to my front door one evening and noticed the lock didn't feel right. It didn't click into place the way it usually did. I thought maybe the lock had been sticking where I was just being paranoid, but then I realized my spare key was gone. It had always been hidden in the same spot, under a rock near the flower bed outside. I checked it countless times before, but it wasn't there anymore. I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I had misplaced the key or someone else had found it by accident. But then I noticed other things. The curtain tiebacks in the living room were pulled tighter than I'd left them, and the rug by the front door seemed to be shifted slightly. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just forgetful after the breakup. Maybe I hadn't noticed before. But the nagging feeling stayed with me. A few days later, the first call came. Unknown number. I didn't pick up, but when I listened to the voicemail, I recognized his voice instantly. It wasn't even a message, it was just breathing. The kind of deep, steady breathing that made my skin crawl. I deleted it without listening to the rest, but something in my gut told me I wasn't going to be rid of him that easily. The locks on my door started to feel like they were the only thing standing between me and whatever was lurking outside. I locked them every night, double-checked the windows, and even went so far as to make sure all the blinds were closed. But then one night, I woke up to something that made my blood run cold. The windows were wide open, all of them. I hadn't opened them. I always made sure they were closed before going to bed. There was no way I could have forgotten, especially after everything that had been going on. My first thought was that I was just too tired to remember, but when I got out to close them, I noticed something else. The kitchen drawers were open. A couple of books had been moved around on my bookshelf, and my coat was hanging on a chair when I never left it there. I freaked out. Whoever had been in my apartment knew the layout, knew exactly what to touch and where I kept things. But there were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no pry marks on the door. It was like whoever had been in here already had a key. That's what I knew for sure. Philip had been inside. He must have been coming in and out without me even knowing. But how? How had he managed to get a copy of my key? I tried not to panic. I called a locksmith the next day and had all locks changed. It felt like a small victory, like I was taking control back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The paranoia followed me every time I left my apartment. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't sleep at night. Every time I heard a car outside or footsteps in the hallway, my heart raced. The worst part, the feeling that he was always one step ahead. A week after changing the locks, I found another key. This one was under my doormat. I don't know how long it had been there, but I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't the same as my old spare, but it looked like it could fit my door. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out how it got there. I knew then that I wasn't crazy. Philip had been here. He had some way of getting in, no matter how many locks I changed. At this point, I was completely on edge. I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore, not without wondering if someone was watching me or waiting for me to let my guard down. But I didn't know what to do. I couldn't exactly call the cops without any evidence. And besides, I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. It was just a key, right? Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe I was overreacting. But then a week later, it happened again. I went to bed after double-checking every lock, every window. When I woke up the next morning, I went straight to the kitchen and froze. The lock on the pantry door was open. I never left it open. I always made sure it was shut tight, especially with all the strange things happening. But someone had been in there. I didn't even know how to feel anymore. Anger. Fear. Panic. All I knew was that I wasn't safe. No matter what I did, he was still here. I couldn't stop him from showing up in my life, and I couldn't figure out how to make him go away. So I did what I thought was the only option. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and went to stay with a friend for a few nights. I didn't feel safe being alone in the apartment anymore, not with everything that had happened. My friend suggested I install a security system, and I agreed. It didn't feel like enough, but it was something. It was the only thing I could do to protect myself. But even now, I'm not sure it's enough. Every time I hear a knock at the door or see someone passing by in the hallway, I hold my breath. I lock the door behind me when I go out, double-check the windows, and even keep my blinds closed all the time. I keep thinking that maybe this time I'm safe, but then I'll find another key hidden somewhere, on a shelf, under a couch cushion in my coat pocket. I don't know how he's doing it. I don't know how he's always one step ahead of me. But I do know one thing. I can't outrun him. He's in my life whether I like it or not, and it feels like no matter what I do, I can't get rid of him. I thought I was doing fine after the breakup. Spencer and I had been on and off for a while, and when we finally ended things for good, I was kind of relieved. The constant arguments, the manipulation, it was draining. But now that I was free, I felt that I could finally breathe again. I didn't have to worry about walking on eggshells or wondering where he was or what he was doing. I just wanted to move on, enjoy my life, and forget about him. But it didn't stay that way. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia when the first photograph showed up. It was in my mailbox like it was just another piece of junk mail. I almost threw it out without looking at it. But then something made me stop. The photo was a picture of me walking my dog down the street. I didn't recognize the angle at first, but then it hit me. The photo had been taken from behind, and it looked like someone had been watching me for a while. I could see my dog's leash in the shot, and it was unmistakably me. But I hadn't seen anyone around when I was out there. No one had been following me. I thought maybe it was some random prank. Maybe a friend had taken it, or someone just had the same idea to take a random picture of a person on the street. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I hadn't seen any photographers or anyone else out there, and it was a pretty quiet neighborhood. The next day, I found another one. This time, it was tucked under my door. I opened it, and there it was, me, sitting in a coffee shop, reading a book. I recognized the table, the coffee cup, everything. But again, I couldn't remember seeing anyone nearby when I was there. I was alone. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I told myself it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe I'd just been imagining things. But as the photos kept coming, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I found one in my purse at work, just sitting there, wedged between my notebook and my keys. It was a picture of me sitting at my desk, absorbed in my work, the photo taken from the other side of the room. The weirdest part, the angle was so precise. Whoever had taken it knew exactly where I'd be sitting. I started to get anxious. My heart was racing. My mind kept telling me that it wasn't a big deal. Maybe it was just someone who happened to catch me in a photo, someone who wasn't trying to freak me out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The photos were becoming more and more personal, more detailed. One day, I found a photo of me at the park. I was sitting on a bench, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't seen anyone around when I was there. And the worst part, the photo was taken from a distance, but it was clear enough to show me exactly who I was with. No one had been around that day. I was by myself. I started to panic. What the hell was going on? Why were these photos showing up? And why did they always seem to catch me in these random moments when I thought I was alone? I tried talking myself down. It was probably just someone who had been following me, maybe a stranger who was obsessed or something. But then, a few days later, I found a photo in my car. It was of me at the grocery store, standing in front of the bread aisle, holding a carton of eggs. But the photo wasn't taken from just anywhere. It was taken from behind a shelf, like someone was hiding, waiting for the right moment to snap the picture. And again, I had no idea who it could have been. I hadn't noticed anyone lurking around. By this point, I was freaking out. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't relax at home. Every time I went out, I felt like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard. The photos kept coming, each one getting more and more specific. It was like someone had been stalking me, following my every move. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, someone was there watching. One day, I found a photo I couldn't ignore. It was tucked inside my jacket pocket, just like the others, but this one was different. This time, the photo wasn't taken from a distance. It was right up close. It was of me standing in front of my apartment building, the camera clearly focused on my face. My heart sank when I realized what this meant. Whoever had been taking these photos wasn't just following me. They knew where I lived. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Spencer. It had to be Spencer. It made sense, didn't it? He'd always been a little obsessive, a little controlling. Even after we broke up, he kept reaching out, trying to make me feel guilty or questioning my decisions. He'd always say things like, "You think I don't care about you?" Or, "You'll realize one day that I was the only one who really understood you." I'd blocked him on social media, ignored his calls, and tried to move on, but I guess that wasn't enough for him. Now he was showing me just how much he knew about me, just how far he'd go to make me feel like I couldn't escape. I was terrified, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want him to know that I knew what he was doing. So I kept pretending everything was normal, kept pretending I didn't see the photos or feel a panic building up inside me every time I opened my front door. I couldn't keep living like this, though. Every time I walked my dog or went to grab coffee, I looked over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched. Every time I sat down at my desk at work, I felt like someone was looking through the window, taking photos of me. My privacy, my sense of security, it was all gone, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I wanted to confront Spencer, tell him to stop, but I knew he'd deny it. He'd say I was paranoid, that I was overreacting. Maybe he even accused me of being the crazy one. But I knew it was him. I don't know how long I can keep going like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's out there lurking in the shadows, watching me. All I know is that I can't escape him. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, Spencer is always one step ahead, and he's not going to stop until I'm back in his life, or until I'm completely out of it. I always thought the worst thing about moving to a new apartment was getting used to the weird noises in the walls or dealing with loud neighbors. But that wasn't the case for me. When I moved into my new place, everything seemed pretty chill. It was a quiet building, mostly older folks and a couple of students, so I thought it'd be a good spot to settle into. I was excited, new start, new space. What I didn't expect was the guy across the hall to be so quiet. And by quiet, I mean creepy silent. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was polite when I ran into him in the hallway once or twice, but he didn't really engage in conversation. He just nodded, said a quick hello, and kept walking. Nothing strange there, right? Not everyone's into small talk. But here's where it started to get weird. I never heard any noise from his apartment. No TV, no music, no talking, no footsteps, nothing. My walls were thin, so I'd usually hear the normal apartment sounds, like someone shuffling around, dishes clinking, or the occasional muffled conversation. But from him, silence. And I mean dead silence. I figured maybe he was one of those people who just stayed in all the time, didn't entertain anyone, didn't need background noise. But after a while, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was this constant low hum of something. It wasn't a sound I could place exactly, but it felt like it was always there in the background. The kind of noise you hear just before you fall asleep or when you're half awake. At first, I ignored it. I was getting used to the place and had my own stuff to deal with. But then the lights started flickering. At night, I'd noticed the lights in his apartment turning on and off in a pattern that was almost deliberate. But there was never anyone visible, just the light flickering, sometimes bright, sometimes dim. The first couple of times I thought maybe it was just bad wiring. But then I started paying attention, and it became clear that this wasn't an accident. And then came the scraping sound. It wasn't a big deal at first. It sounded like something dragging across the walls. Not a loud and violent sound, but enough to be annoying, like furniture scraping against the floor. But this wasn't happening at normal times. It was happening late at night or in the early hours of the morning when everyone else was asleep. I thought I was imagining things, but it kept happening, almost like a pattern. It sounded like someone was moving around, but doing their best to stay out of sight. Maybe I was being paranoid, but it made me feel like I was being watched. I tried to brush it off. It could have been the pipes, it could have been anything. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the silence, the flickering lights, the scraping, it started wearing me down. I became hyper aware of every little sound in the building. The tapping of someone's shoes, the creak of the floorboards, even the hum of the refrigerator. It all became amplified, especially when the guy across the hall was involved. And that's when it started happening. One day I came home from work and tried to open my apartment door. It was jammed. I'd only lived there a few months, so I wasn't used to the quirks of the place, but the lock didn't budge. I figured the door had swollen from the humidity or something. I tried calling the landlord, but he was out of town for the weekend. So I decided to knock on my neighbor's door, the quiet guy, and see if he had any tools or a way to help me get the door open. When he answered, it was just like every other time I'd seen him. He had that polite but distant look in his eyes. He asked what I needed, and I told him my door wouldn't open. He didn't seem too shocked, just said, "Sure, no problem, let me grab something." But as soon as he stepped back to go inside, I'd noticed something that made my heart race. His apartment was dark, but I could make out the shapes of things hanging on the walls. And that's when I saw it. Photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. They were everywhere. All over the walls. On a coffee table. Stacked in corners. And each one was a picture of me. Pictures of me walking down the street, leaving the building, sitting on my couch, reading a book. Some were close-up shots. Some were farther away, like they had been taken from a distance. It wasn't just a few random photos. It was like collection, like he had been following me, taking pictures of me for months, documenting my life. The strangest part. Some of the pictures were from angles I knew weren't possible without being inside my apartment or at least very close to it. My stomach twisted in knots. He wasn't just watching me from across the hall. He had been creeping on me everywhere. I froze, not sure what to do. Should I run? Should I scream? But before I could say anything, the neighbor turned around and saw the direction I was looking. He smiled like he wasn't the least bit surprised. He didn't seem embarrassed or apologetic, just calm. Too calm. He said something like, "I've been keeping track of you. Just making sure you're okay." But the way he said it, like it was nothing, made my blood run cold. I backed away from the door. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure if I should call the cops or if I should just get out of there. I was terrified, but my mind was racing with a million thoughts. Had he been watching me since I moved in? How long had he been living across from me, taking pictures and tracking my every move? Had he always been there, just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move? I don't even remember walking back to my apartment. I think I was in some kind of shock. When I got inside, I locked the door and just sat there. I couldn't process what had just happened. I was paralyzed with fear. That was weeks ago. I still don't know what to do. I never saw the neighbor again. The lights in his apartment don't flicker anymore, and I haven't heard the scraping sounds at night. But every time I look across the hall, I feel like I'm being watched. Every time I leave my apartment, I check the hallway, half expecting to see him standing there, just out of sight like he was before. I don't know what Spencer's doing or why he's doing it. All I know is that I'm still trapped in the apartment, still feeling like I'm not alone. And no matter how hard I try to escape it, I can't shake the feeling that my ex, the one who used to be so controlling, is still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I woke up to a dozen unread emails. It was early, the sun hadn't even fully risen yet, and I was still groggy from a long night of weird dreams that I couldn't remember. At first, I thought maybe they were just spam or random junk I'd signed up for by mistake. But when I checked the sender, something in my gut twisted. The email address was unrecognizable, some random string of characters, but the subject lines were enough to make me sit up straight in bed. Anything I've forgotten. You think you're safe, but you're not. There were a dozen of them, stacked one after the other, and each one felt like it was sinking into me deeper than the last. I don't even remember opening them at first. Maybe I was in some kind of shock. I felt frozen like I couldn't breathe. The messages were bizarre and cryptic, but they weren't random. They felt too personal, too specific. At first, I thought it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe it was a prank. But as I read through them, it became clear. I know where you work. Your doctor's appointment is tomorrow. I'll see you there. You don't think I see you when you're out with your friends, but I do. Each message was a little worse than the last, like the sender was peeling back the layers of my life, one detail at a time. My work schedule, my doctor's appointments, even random little things like a text I'd sent to my best friend the night before, telling her I was running late to dinner. It was like someone had access to everything I did, everything I said, everything I thought was private. My heart was racing. The kind of heart racing terror that you can't shake, no matter how hard you try. And then it hit me. That name in the back of my head that I'd been avoiding for months. Cameron. We'd broken up over half a year ago. He wasn't a bad guy, at least not at first. He was charming, funny, and everything seemed great. But then the controlling behavior started. The constant checking in, the jealousy, the way he'd show up unexpectedly, just to say hi, or accuse me of not caring enough when I didn't answer a text immediately. The things he said when he got mad, how everything felt like it was my fault, even though I knew deep down it wasn't. And then eventually it all exploded. I ended things I had to. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. It was messy. I think I felt relief when it ended, but there was also fear. Fear that he might not take it well, even though he said he understood. And now here I was sitting on my bed, reading emails that confirmed everything I'd been afraid of. That he'd never let me go. That he was still watching. I blocked the email address immediately, thinking that would fix it. Just stop him before it went too far. But the next day, there was another email, and another, different address. Same creepy, unsettling tone. I saw you at the cafe today. Nice shirt. Did your friend know what you've been saying behind her back? You look tired. Maybe you should rest more. But I like when you look a little frazzled. Every time I tried to block him, every time I changed my email or password, the messages kept coming. It was like he was always one step ahead. I didn't know how he was getting my information, but I knew it was him. Only Cameron would talk to me like that, with that same mix of affection and control. Always with a false concern. Always with that tone like he was trying to get me to question myself, to doubt my own actions. It was driving me insane. I started to feel like I couldn't escape him. I couldn't even be alone with my own thoughts anymore, because it felt like he was always lurking just behind me, waiting for the next chance to remind me that he was there. I kept trying to ignore it, told myself I was overreacting. But the more the emails came, the more it became clear that he wasn't just watching from a distance. He was close. He was near. I started double-checking everything, locking my windows, my doors, checking under my bed, even in my closet. but I didn't feel safe. I kept feeling like someone was in the next room, like I wasn't alone. It was too quiet, too still. Then came the worst part. It was a Sunday in the middle of the afternoon. I was at home sitting on the couch when I got another email. This one was different from the others. It was more detailed, more in your face. There were no vague messages, no cryptic hints. It was straight up terrifying. I watched you at the grocery store last week. I saw you buying your favorite snacks. You're looking good. I like when you dress like that. You remember when I bought you those jeans, don't you? You used to wear them all the time. You looked great in them. My stomach dropped. That was my ex. Only you would remember things like that. I hadn't worn those jeans in months. But Cameron knew them. He knew what I liked. He knew my routines. He knew everything. The worst part, it wasn't just the emails. There was a knock on my door that afternoon, and for some reason I didn't feel right about answering it. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and no one ever knocked at my door like that out of the blue. My heart was in my throat. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. I waited for a moment, then looked again. Still no one. But as I backed away from the door, I noticed something. A single folded piece of paper was stuck under the door. My hands were shaking as I picked it up and unfolded it. It was another message. Handwritten this time, it said, "I know where you are. I've always known." I felt like I was going to puke. I called my best friend immediately, told her everything, but she didn't really understand. How could she? How could anyone? This wasn't just some creepy email prank. This was him. Cameron was out there watching me, even now, even after all this time. I still don't know how he's doing it. How he's getting into my life, finding these things out. It feels like he's in my head, even though he hasn't actually spoken to me in months. I can't shake the feeling that he's lurking just outside my window, or following me to the store, or sitting in his car, watching me from a distance. Every time I close my eyes, I can almost hear him. The voice in my head telling me that I'll never be free. I don't know what to do anymore. I've changed my phone number, deleted social media, and blocked every possible way for him to reach me. But it doesn't matter. He's always there. Always just one step ahead. Always knowing everything about me. And the scariest part, I don't think he's ever going to stop. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even want it. But Paul, my ex, insisted on buying me that damn necklace. It was one of those gifts that felt too over the top, too grandiose for someone like me. It wasn't my style at all. Gold with a big gaudy pendant, the kind that looks like it's meant to be on some celebrity, not a regular person like me. But when he gave it to me, I smiled and said all the right things. I didn't have the heart to tell him that it wasn't something I wanted. That it felt heavy, not in the physical sense, but emotionally. The kind of weight that comes with feeling like someone's trying to hold you in place with their gestures, trying to make you belong to them in ways that make you uncomfortable. I wore it a couple of times, but it didn't feel right. It felt like he was trying to wrap me up in something I didn't need, something that wasn't even me. But when we broke up, I didn't bother to take it off. I tossed it into the back of my drawer, where I hoped it would gather dust and fade out of my life for good. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Months went by after the breakup. I moved into a new apartment, rearranged my life, tried to get back to some version of normal. I thought I was doing okay. But the thing about getting over someone, especially someone like Paul, is that it's not as simple as cutting ties and moving on. There's always something left behind, something you didn't expect. Some loose thread that pulls you back when you least expect it. One day, I was cleaning, going through old stuff I didn't need anymore. I was throwing away some old receipts, random papers, and just things that had piled up. I came across the necklace again, buried under a stack of things I hadn't even looked at in months. It seemed like a good time to finally deal with it. So I picked it up, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd try to sell it. That way, I wouldn't have to keep it around, but I'd at least get something out of it. The problem was the moment I held it in my hand, I felt this weird sense of heaviness. Not in a physical way, but more like it was pulling me, tugging at me, telling me to put it back. I shook it off. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had a lot on my plate that day, and I wasn't in the mood for strange thoughts. So I walked out of my room, ready to go down to the pawn shop around the corner. But as I moved through the apartment, the necklace felt heavier, like I was carrying a weight that wasn't there before. It was getting harder to keep it in my hand, and every step I took felt like I was being dragged backward toward the drawer. I stopped for a second, confused, and checked the necklace again. It didn't look any different, Still just a shiny piece of jewelry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't want to leave. I didn't want to think about it too much, so I stuffed it in my bag and forced myself to ignore the weird sensation. I got to the pawn shop and tried to sell it, but they wouldn't take it. The guy behind the counter looked at me like I was crazy, like there was something off about the necklace. After a couple of minutes, I gave up and I went back home. I didn't feel like dealing with it anymore, but the strange feeling didn't go away. It was like that necklace wasn't going to let me get rid of it. Later that night, after I'd finished up dinner and was just about to go to bed, I walked into my room to find the necklace on my pillow. Not in my drawer where I'd left it, but sitting right there on my bed. It wasn't just the necklace that freaked me out. It was the smell. His perfume. I could smell it faintly in the air, like it had been lingering there for hours, just waiting for me to notice. That was it. The smell of Paul, that weird mix of aftershave and whatever else he wore that stuck to him, no matter what he did. I froze. I stood there staring at the necklace like it was some sort of trick. It couldn't be real. How could it be? I hadn't even left the apartment after the pawn shop. I hadn't been anywhere near his place. How could it have gotten there? It wasn't possible. But there it was, just sitting there like it had always belonged. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to confront it, but I couldn't stop myself. I threw the necklace in the trash. I was done. This was ridiculous. I wasn't going to let it control me not anymore. But the next morning I woke up to the same thing. The necklace was back sitting on my pillow again. It was like nothing had changed. I wanted to scream. I felt trapped. How was this even happening? It wasn't like I hadn't tried getting rid of it before. I'd thrown it away twice now, but each time it came back. And it wasn't just the necklace. It was the feeling it gave me. Like I couldn't escape. Like it was a part of him, somehow still here, even though he was gone. I tried calling my friends to talk about it, but they just told me I was probably imagining things. Maybe it was, I thought. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. This wasn't normal. It wasn't just about the necklace. It was the fact that Paul, even after everything, was still trying to control me. And no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to cut him out of my life, that damn necklace always came back. Every time I threw it out, every time I sold it, it would find its way back into my hands. The worst part, it wasn't even just the necklace anymore. It was the fact that I started to wonder, what else had he done? Had he been in my apartment? Was he still watching me somehow? Every night, I would check my locks, double-check the windows, and make sure everything was as it should be. But it never felt like enough. Every time I turned out the lights, I felt like he was there. Not physically, but in the way I could never shake the feeling that he still had some kind of hold over me. I've tried everything to get rid of it now, selling it again, leaving it at a charity drop-off, throwing it in the trash, but every single time it comes back. I don't know what Paul did to that necklace, but I'm starting to wonder if it's not just a piece of jewelry anymore. Maybe it's something more, a way for him to stay with me, to remind me that he's always watching, always close, even after everything is over. And honestly, I don't know how much longer I can deal with it. Every time I wake up and see it, I feel like I'm suffocating. Like I can't breathe, like I'm being dragged under. I can't get rid of it. It's starting to feel like I never will. I had finally done it. After months of being harassed by Dennis, text messages, calls, social media posts, even random people showing up at my door, I thought I had finally broken free. I'd blocked his number, deleted every trace of him online, and changed my routines to avoid anything that could lead me back to him. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest, like I could finally breathe again without worrying that he was watching me or showing up unannounced. For a while, everything was calm. I got into a groove of living my life without the constant dread that came with being in a relationship with Dennis. I went back to doing the things I loved, hanging out with friends, and spending more time outside. I started going to my favorite coffee shop again, the one I used to avoid because he would always show up and sit at the table near me just watching. It felt good to be free so I could finally take control of my life again. But then one day it started again. Small things at first. Things that didn't make sense, but when you're living in a city that always feels like it's just a little too big and too small at the same time, you learn to ignore things. Or at least I tried to. One morning I was running late for work. I rushed to my car, only to find that someone had parked directly behind me, blocking me in. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe it was just a neighbor or someone who parked without thinking. But as I went up to speak to the driver, the car was empty. No one around, not a single soul. just my car and theirs perfectly blocking me. It took me a good half hour to get it sorted, and by the time I made it to work, I was already late. I tried to brush it off, but something in the back of my mind kept nagging me. I had a gut feeling that it wasn't just a random inconvenience. Later that week, the weirdness continued. I was heading to the train station, ready to take the usual route I'd always taken. The streets were crowded, the usual rush of commuters moving in their usual pattern. But when I got to the path that led to the station, a giant tree had fallen across the road, blocking the entire walkway. It looked fresh, like it had fallen just when I was about to pass through. The weirdest part, no one was there to clean it up, and there were no emergency services around. It was like it had appeared out of nowhere, out of time. I managed to find a way around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow meant to stop me. That evening, I went to grab coffee from my favorite spot, the one where I'd been trying to reclaim some normalcy. As I walked up, I saw the closed sign hanging on the door. I'd been there at least a dozen times, at the same time of day, and they were never closed. The barista inside looked up, surprised to see me, but he didn't seem to know why the shop had closed early. I left without my coffee, but this time I wasn't just frustrated. I was shaken. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. It was as if the universe was conspiring to keep me trapped. Each time I tried to go somewhere, something would stop me, like I was being watched, like every step I took was being anticipated, like someone didn't want me to get away. The next few days were even stranger. I went to my car one morning to find something out of place. A coffee cup, an old one, sitting in the passenger seat. It was his coffee cup. I didn't even need to look at the name written on it. I could smell the faint trace of the coffee he always drank, the same bitter taste he would always leave behind after one of those mornings when we'd fight and he'd storm out. I stared at it for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. I hadn't been in contact with him for months. How could this be here? I checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing behind me. I even checked my back seat because I honestly thought he might be there. But no, the car was empty. Just the coffee cup, sitting there like it had been waiting for me. And that's when I found the note. Slipped underneath the coffee cup, written on a napkin in messy handwriting. I'm waiting for you. My heart dropped. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. This wasn't just weird luck or bad timing. This was Dinas, somehow, still finding ways to get to me, to make me feel like I couldn't escape. The worst part, I knew deep down that he'd been planning this. There was no way he didn't know my routine, the places I went, the things I liked to do. It wasn't just a matter of following me. He knew how to mess with my life, how to make sure I never felt safe. I tossed the note and the cup into the trash, but that didn't stop the feeling of dread that followed me around for days. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting him to be there, lurking in the background of my life like some shadow I couldn't shake. But even though I was more paranoid than ever, nothing really happened. Until one afternoon when I came back to my apartment to find something else. I had just walked through the door when I noticed a slight change. The light was flickering in my hallway just a bit. A couple of steps forward, and I saw a pair of shoes by the front door, exactly where I always kept them. They weren't mine. They were his. I froze, my body going cold. I stepped back, heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I realized I wasn't just being watched anymore. I wasn't just being followed. He had found a way into my space, into my sanctuary, and I hadn't even noticed. I ran through the apartment, checking all windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. But no matter how many times I checked, the feeling of being hunted didn't go away. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the things happening outside my control. It was the fact that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, Dinas had found a way back into my life. I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. But even as I packed up my things, I felt it. The walls closing in. The sense that Dinas was still there, watching, waiting. And no matter where I went next, I knew I wouldn't truly escape. Because the worst part, he was always one step ahead, always waiting. I never thought a breakup would leave me feeling this empty. It wasn't just the relationship itself, it was everything that came with it. The shared routines, the comfort of knowing someone was always there, even if things weren't perfect. When it ended, it was like a piece of me got ripped away, and I didn't know how to fill the hole it left behind. I tried to keep busy. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends, but the quiet moments, especially at night, were the hardest. I'd sit in my apartment, staring at the empty space where his things used to be. The loneliness crept in, and I realized I needed something, anything, to distract myself from the silence. That's when I decided to adopt a dog. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Something to take care of, something to love. I went to the shelter, looking for a dog that needed a home. I found him, a scruffy little terrier mix who looked at me with those big, hopeful eyes, like he was saying, "I'm here for you." His name was Max. I figured it was a sign, a way to show I was moving on, taking control again. I brought him home, and for a while, it was great. He was a sweet dog, energetic and playful, always excited to see me when I came back from work. It felt like the perfect decision, like the hole left by the breakup was starting to fill up with something real. But then, exactly 1 week after I adopted him, Max went missing. It wasn't like he ran off or anything. He wasn't the type of dog to wander. He was always right there by my side. But when I woke up one morning and saw his bed empty, a wave of panic hit me. I checked the apartment, every corner, under every piece of furniture, but he was gone. I spent the next several hours tearing the neighborhood apart, calling the shelter, printing out flyers, knocking on doors. I asked everyone I could, but no one had seen him. It felt like he had just disappeared. I started to lose hope. The longer he was gone, the worse it felt. Every time I came home, I expected to hear him barking or see his little tail wagging through the door. But nothing. The apartment felt empty again, even with the constant worry and the nagging thought in the back of my head that something wasn't right. Then, after what felt like forever, Max showed up. He was back at my door one evening, just standing there, looking at me like he was waiting for me to let him in. I was so relieved I almost cried, but as I opened the door, I could tell something was off. He was acting weird. Max, who had always been so energetic and playful, was now skittish. He wouldn't come near me at first, kept pacing back and forth as if he was afraid. His fur, which had been soft and clean, now looked matted and dirty, like he'd been rolling around in something rough. I tried to coax him inside, but he kept backing away. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but I knew something wasn't right. When he finally did come inside, he went straight to his bed and curled up in a tight ball, not looking at me, not moving. I knelt down to pet him, trying to reassure him, but as soon as I touched his collar, something caught my eye. There was a small piece of paper tucked under it. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was a note written in messy handwriting. "I'm never far away." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was Dennis's. I recognized it from all the notes he used to write me when we were together. Long, rambling, desperate pleas that always ended with some form of manipulation. "I'm sorry," he'd say. "Please don't leave me. I can't live without you." But this note wasn't like the others. It was short and cold, like a warning. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Dennis had somehow taken my dog. He'd been using Max to get to me, to control me, to mess with my mind. He knew how much I loved the dog, how much I needed something to hold onto after everything fell apart. So he took him. And now Max was back, changed, scared, and confused. I couldn't stop shaking as I tried to process it all. How had Dennis gotten to him? How had he taken Max without me noticing? Had he been coming to my apartment? Had he been watching me the whole time? Max wouldn't leave his bed for the next couple of days. He barely ate. He would cower every time I moved too quickly or reached out to pet him. I could tell that whatever had happened to him while he was gone had been traumatic. It was like he didn't trust me anymore, like he had seen something awful and couldn't forget it. I spent the next few days contacting animal hospitals, hoping they could give me some clue about what had happened to him. But they didn't have any answers. No one had seen him, no one had turned him in, and there was no record of him being brought in for anything suspicious. It was like he had just disappeared, only to return with that chilling note. That's when I realized it wasn't over. Dennis wasn't gone. He was still in my life, still playing with my emotions, still finding ways to get to me. He wasn't going to let me move on. He was always going to be there, lurking in the background, pulling the strings. The worst part was that I didn't even feel like I could protect Max. He had been used as a pawn, a way for Dennis to manipulate me into thinking I was free when I wasn't. I was trapped in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I started locking all the windows, checking all the doors before I went to bed, trying to make sure no one could get in again. I kept Max close, but he wasn't the same. The bond we had was there, but it was fragile. I didn't know what else Dennis might do, or how far he was willing to go to keep me from moving on. Max was with me now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't really back. Dennis had used him to get to me once, and he could do it again. And even though I thought I was in control of my life, I knew deep down that as long as Dennis was around, I never really would be.